Hello, my name is Andrea, and this is High Literature, a program where I talk about comics and books and art and share them with you, the viewer. So last week I had a classic cut off at the end of the video. The recording time ran out. I'm so sorry. But I only had like two sentences left to read. I was pretty much at the end of the reading anyway. Um, so close. But yeah, sorry about that. I have done a return to books because that's what I've always wanted this channel to be, something where I talk about both books and comics because I guess just the way I grew up, I was lucky to be in a situation where I just never really differentiated the two. Like it was really surprising to me to find out later in life that people saw comics as like low brow reading, I guess. Like just, for it wasn't high literature. And it just like really surprised me because how many books are there that are just trash, just bad writing, bad, just not good. And then you have plenty of books that are just fantastic. And I feel that's the same, like you can apply that to anything you want in the world, especially when it comes to art. You have good and you have bad within all the mediums. And it's not like this particular medium as a whole is bad and this particular medium as a whole is good. All art forms, they're great. And like everything else, you have the good, the bad, and the ugly. So yeah, I just seeing like books is like good and comics is bad. That just never that sentiment never manifested in my psyche. So anyway, yeah, I've been doing a lot of comic videos and decided to go back to books for a little while. So last week, the videos I did, I went over the philosopher poet Novalis and um, Henrik Sienkiewicz's book Quo Vadis, and gonna move along to my favorite, Victor Hugo. I've read two of his books, The Hunchback of Notre-Dame and Les Miserables. And I originally, like, my plan was to do Les Miserables. But what ended up happening was, so I've read Les Miserables, I don't know how many times. I've read it a lot. And I've only read this book once. And it was a long time ago. I couldn't even begin to tell you when I read this book. I don't know if it was 10 years ago. I don't know if it was 15 years ago. I don't know if it was 20 years ago. It was a long time ago and only once. So I figured, well, between the two, I should probably revisit this one. And man, I just got sucked in and just kind of like had to put Les Miserables to the side because this has just completely taken over my brain. It's so good. It is absolutely one of the most, if not the most, number one, like tragic thing I've ever come across. Like when you think about tragedies and you think about sad stories, ain't none of them holds a candle to this guy here. Not even Les Miserables. And Les Miserables is sad. that book, which I think is like, I don't know, I don't have it here with me. I left it at home, but I think it's, I mean, easily twice the length, if not longer. And this kicks Les Miserables' butt when it comes to just breaking your heart. And yeah, this is really like, it has sucked me in. And it's been really, I don't know if fun is the right word, revisiting it, because it's a heartbreaker. It is, I don't want to say it's like this book isn't for the, you know, the light of heart, the faint of heart, but it is. It's for the tenderhearted. It's for the sentimental people. People who are heart of heart, you won't get it. So maybe it can like have some How the Grinch Stole Christmas magic on you, and you'll read this and it will make your heart grow. I don't know. But that expression, like, not for the faint of heart, I guess that could be applicable to things that are just gratuitously violent. Yeah, not for the faint of heart, but like as far as emotions, matters of the heart, this is for the faint of heart. This is for the sentimental touches. But I gotta tell you, have some hankies ready, because the waterworks are gonna be cascading. And it's just, oh my God, this book is so good. So I remember, so it's been a long time since I read this book. So I had just kind of a vague recollection of it. And one of the things that really stuck with me was the fact that, so like when you think of the story and what it's about, and I gave it a Google, I was like, just popped in, I was like, what is the Hunchback of Notre-Dame book about? And it's really interesting, like the things that you see, the things that you read. Like I feel like if you were to take a survey, everybody would say the same thing. You know, it's about the hunchback Quasimodo, the bishop who took him in, and the conflict of like his piety and the lust he has for Esmeralda. And then you have Esmeralda, who, you know, the whole scene where Quasimodo is in the pillory and she goes and brings him water, and he just, you know, falls in love with her compassion and her beauty. And maybe even some people might say that it's kind of it's a love story that Victor wrote. It's a love letter that he wrote to the church itself, Notre Dame. And while all of these things are true, nothing mentions the mother. And I remember when I first read this book, I was so blown away at how we have such an important character whom the whole story is tied around, and she gets no mention at all. This character, and it's just really fascinating to me. So one of the things I want to address is the title itself, The Hunchback of Notre-Dame. So it's one of those things where, you know, you just hear it so much that you don't even really think about what it means. So I decide, you know, like, what does Notre Dame mean? Now, this is embarrassing, but like Dame, okay, we know like that's lady, woman, Dame. Notre, So I thought that it meant night or dark, and I was wrong. It does not mean that. So Notre Dame means Our Lady, and what it means by that, like not Our Lady, like just our some random lady, but specifically the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of the Church, the Mother of Christ, is who this is like Notre Dame means, and it's the name of the church itself, like it's Our Lady, and it's just so interesting to me because, like, you think about how, like, the church it represents in the story, it's sanctuary. It's where Quasimodo was able to live and not be harassed by the public. It's where he brought Esmeralda to be rescued from the mob who, they were trying to capture her to execute her. And so it's like this mother figure of like safety and refuge. And it's also interesting, like I was looking up what it means. Like I was looking up different translations of the forgotten mother, because that's how I feel this character is. She's like this forgotten mother, and I got a kick out of the fact that the French word for mother is the same as the sea, and I just love that similarity, like mother, ocean, like the primordial womb. Like we're going back to mother, we're going back to the beginning, we're going back to life, the source of life itself. And it's just, there are a lot of onion layers in this story. So Hugo writes great prefaces. The preface that he wrote, actually, I think it was the publisher that I'm thinking of for Les Miserables. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He wrote the preface for this book. It's dated March 1831. And going back to like what I was like, the thing about how, there's this held opinion, which is I'd say it's more of a fact than opinion, that this is a love letter to Gothic architecture, to Notre Dame. Victor Hugo, he was really salty about how a lot of the architecture of Paris was being torn down, was being rebuilt, was being repaired, was being reconstructed. And in his eyes, it just took away the beauty of everything and just made it just lousy. I think a lot of people feel that way today about stuff going. Anyway, I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but so with that being said, the preface that he wrote might make more of an impression. He just really loved the architecture, the old Gothic architecture, and it just broke his heart seeing it be eradicated. So, some years ago, while visiting, or rather exploring Notre Dame, the author of this book discovered in an obscure corner of one of the towers this word carved upon the wall. Now, this is a Greek word, and I looked it up, and it's pronounced Ananke, if I'm saying it right. Here. These Greek characters, black with age and cut deep into the stone, the peculiarities of form and arrangement common to Gothic calligraphy that marked them the work of some hand in the Middle Ages, and above all, the sad and mournful meaning which they expressed, forcibly impressed the author. He questioned himself, he tried to divine what sad soul was loath to quit the earth without leaving behind this brand of crime or misery upon the brow of the old church. Since then, the wall has been whitewashed or scraped, I have forgotten which, and the inscription has vanished. For this is the way in which, for some 200 years, we have treated the wonderful churches of the Middle Ages. They are mutilated in every part, inside as well as out. The priest whitewashes them, the archdeacon scrapes them, then come the people who tear them down. So, save for the frail memory which the author of this book here dedicates to it, nothing now remains of the mysterious word engraved upon the dark tower of Notre-Dame, nothing of the unknown fate which it summed up so sadly. The person who wrote that word upon the wall faded away many ages since amidst passing generations. The word in its turn has faded from the church wall. The church itself, perhaps, will soon vanish from the earth. Upon that word, this book is based. March 1831. And then there's a little asterisk explaining what this word means. Anake is the Greek word for fate. And when I think about the forgotten mother and how the story plays out because of this character, I mean, this is a book about fate. This isn't a, if I were to say, I wouldn't call this a love story. It's too heartbreaking to be a love story. It's a book about fate. And I'm going to break it down for you from using the mother as like my guidepost, because it's just like I'm rereading this and it's just reminding me all over again. God, like my first experience with this story was I saw not the original silent movie, but the one that came after with Charles Lawton as Quasimodo and Maureen O'Hara as Esmeralda. She's great. I love her so much. So there were those two, the first one with Lon Chaney and then Charles Lawton. And then there was another one made in the 50s. And then the 90s Disney animated version. Y'all, I remember when that trailer came out and my dad and we saw the trailer and we were both just aghast because in the trailer, Quasimodo is singing the way Disney characters do, and no, Quasimodo is deaf. He can barely speak. Like there was just like Disney. You sit down, say less. Like you're killing me. But interestingly enough, in my disbelief over the mother, if you did not read this book, you would have no idea about this character. And I was curious, since I've only seen that one movie with Charles Lawton, are there other, does anything talk about the mother at all? And funny enough, the Disney movie does. The Disney movie has the mother in it. But when I was reading the breakdown of how the mother fits into the story, while she does play a major role in the animated Disney film, the way they write her character and how things happen are so different from the book. Like it even said in the description, it's the complete opposite of how it happens in the book. They're right. It's the complete opposite. It's so different from what happens that, like, I kind of don't even count that. So, as far as I'm concerned, the mother is just completely forgotten unless you read the original source of this story, which is Hugo's work. Love this man. The way he writes, like, Victor Hugo to me is the Alphonse Mucha of literature. He has such a respect and a reverence for women that you just don't really see a lot of in art, whether it's a painting or the printed page. And yeah, reading Hugo is like looking at Mucha, looking at his paintings. It's so beautiful, it's so romantic, it's so reverent, and not in like a simpering way. He really, like, there's respect there and appreciation. He really just, like, you can feel the tenderness that he has, and it's just something I really appreciate, because a lot of men have no reference for anything, especially women. So it's refreshing. It's nice to, it's like, ah, yes, somebody who cares, somebody who feels the pain. Oh, so the first thing I'm going to dive into, we're going to go to page 135. And this chapter, and here I can only figure that Hugo is being, like, sarcastic. So this is book 4, chapter 1, and the title of this chapter is Kind Souls. And it's about, so I want to, like, read out loud because I just think it's easier and it just, like, puts you in the place. But I don't parlez-vous, so I'm afraid that my butchering the French will kind of, like, take away from the experience. So I'm going to do my best to convey what's going on. So the opening paragraph is talking about how there's this, they call it a bedstead, and it's basically like a platform. And upon this bed, it was customary to expose foundlings to public charity. Now, what that means is, this is going to sound really cruel, but this was the 1400s. Not that people aren't super kind now, but, you know, anyway. This was where people would put unwanted infants, and anybody who wanted to come take this baby, it was theirs for the taking. Whoever chose to take them did so. In front of the bedstead was a copper basin for alms. The sort of living creature lying on the board upon this Sunday morning, known in France as Quasimodo Sunday, in the year of our Lord 1467, seemed to excite in a high degree the curiosity of the somewhat numerous group of people who had gathered around the bed. This group was largely composed of members of the fair sex. They were almost all old women. Now, these women, they are remarking upon this foundling that was left on this platform for anybody to just come along and take and do whatever they want with. And it's Quasimodo. He's not an infant. He's about 4 years old. Let's see here. In fact, the little monster, for we ourselves should find it hard to describe him otherwise, it says in parentheses, was no newborn baby. He was a very bony and very uneasy little bundle, tied up in a linen bag marked with the monogram of Monsieur Guillaume Chartier, I guess that's how you say it, then Bishop of Paris, with a head protruding from one end. This head was a most misshapen thing. There was nothing to be seen of it but a shock of red hair, an eye, a mouth, and teeth. The eye wept, the mouth shrieked, and the teeth seemed only waiting a chance to bite. The whole body kicked and struggled in the bag to the amazement of the crowd, which grew larger and changed continually around it. Now, it's called The Kind Souls, this chapter, and it's referring to these old women that have particularly just like, they're just crowded around Quasimodo, and they're just like, oh my God, what is this thing? And they just rain insults on this poor bound up toddler. And they decide to burn him. They decide to take this 4-year-old and set him on fire. That's the decision. We're gonna set him on fire. For some moments, a young priest had been listening to the arguments. His was a stern face with a broad brow and penetrating eye. He silently put aside the crowd, examined the little sorcerer, and stretched his hand over him. It was high time, for all the godly old women were already licking their lips at the thought of the fine flaming faggot. Faggot meaning like, a lit stick, a lit flame. They were talking about, let's get faggots and we're gonna set them on fire. So they were ready. They were like, yep, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna these kind souls decided we're gonna set this person on fire. I adopt this child, said the priest. He wrapped it in his cassock and bore it away. The spectators looked after him with frightened eyes. A moment later, he had vanished through the Porte Rouge, which then led from the church to the cloisters. I always told you, sister, that young scholar, Monsieur Claude Frollo, was a wizard. Now, wizard, sorcerer, basically they're saying this is witchcraft, this is black magic, this is the work of the devil, that they were calling Quasimodo the Antichrist. They felt very justified in setting this kid on fire, because in their minds it was an abomination. And there's like this impression about this priest that he's a wizard. So they were like, well, of course this wizard would adopt this little sorcerer, It just people just chattering and just shit talking. So that's how Quasimodo and Claude Frollo met. And then 193. Now we're going to go, let's talk a little bit about Claude Frollo. So this priest, he, at an early age, is sent away to study priesthood. And this suits him just fine. He's a very studious person. He loves his books. But then his parents died. And he had basically a baby brother. So he adopts this baby. And let's see. Moved by pity, he was filled with love and devotion for this child, his brother. And human affection was a strange, sweet thing to him who had loved nothing but books before. This affection grew to a singular degree. In so virgin a soul, it was like a first love. Parted in infancy from his parents, whom he scarcely knew, cloistered and as it were immured among his books, eager to study and to learn everything, hitherto paying exclusive attention to his intellect, which delighted in literature, the poor student had had no time to learn that he had a heart. This little fatherless, motherless brother, this baby dropped unawares from heaven into his arms, made a new man of him. He saw that there were other things in the world than the speculations of the Sorbonne and the verses of Homer. That man required affection. That life without tenderness and without love was only a noisy, miserable, unfeeling machine. Only he fancied, for he was at the age when illusions are still replaced by illusions only, that the ties of family and kindred were all that was necessary, and that a little brother to love was enough to fill up his whole life. So we have this studious man who knows nothing of life except studying, books, education, and he loves it. Like, he's not doing this begrudgingly, he's into it. And then he suddenly just, boop, has this baby dropped on him. And not to reference the Grinch again, but it just, made his heart grow. And really just kind of spoiled this baby, which, I mean, can't really blame him. I get it. So then he comes across Quasimodo, overhearing people talking about literally setting him on fire and burning him alive. And it just broke his heart. He approached the unfortunate little being who seemed to be so much hated and so much threatened. Its distress, its deformity, its desertion, the thought of his own little brother, the wild dread which at once struck him that if he should die, his dear little Jehan might also be flung upon that board to suffer. All this rushed into his heart at once. A great wave of pity swept over him, and he carried off the child. When he took the child from the sack, he found it terribly deformed indeed. The poor little imp had a wart over his left eye. His head was buried between his shoulders. His spine was curved, his breastbone prominent, his legs crooked. But he seemed lively, and although it was impossible to say in what language he babbled, his cries proclaimed a certain amount of health and vigor. Claude's pity increased at the sight of so much ugliness, and he vowed in his inmost soul that he would educate this child for the love of his own brother, so that whatever faults little Jehan might in the future commit, he might always have to his credit this charitable deed done for his benefit. It was a sort of investment of good works in his little brother's name. It was part of the stock of good deeds which he decided to lay up for him in advance in case the young rascal should one day run short of this sort of money, the only coin which will be accepted at the toll gate of paradise. So in his mind, he's like doing this good deed to it's like he's like saving goodness for his brother in case his brother like turns out to like be a mess, and he's like, oh well, here, take this goodness that I stockpiled and use it. Like it, like he's still just like, he does feel compassion for Quasimodo, but it's also coming from a place of wanting to continue helping his brother, even like beyond, even like going into like, the spiritual realm. He baptized his adopted child and named him Quasimodo, either because he wished to mark in this way the day upon which the child was found, or because he wished to show by this name how imperfect and how incomplete the poor little creature was. Indeed, Quasimodo, one-eyed, hunchbacked, and knock-kneed, was hardly more than half-made. Now, the next chapter, so chapter 1, we talk about Quasimodo. Chapter 2, it breaks down Frollo's background and how things came to be with him being the caretaker of his brother. And now, chapter 3. The title is in Latin. Immanis pecoris custos immanior ipsi, which translates to the guardian of a monstrous herd and himself more monstrous. Now, what does that mean? Now, in 1482, Quasimodo had grown up. He had been made some years previous bell ringer of Notre-Dame, thanks to his adopted father, Claude Frollo, who had become Archdeacon of Yosas, thanks to his liege lord, Sir Louis de Beaumont. Quasimodo, therefore, was ringer of Notre-Dame. In time, a peculiar bond of intimacy grew between the ringer and the church. Cut off forever from the world by the double fatality of his unknown birth and his deformity, confined from infancy in this double inseparable circle, the poor wretch became used to seeing nothing of the world outside the religious walls which had received him into their shadow. Notre-Dame had been to him by turns as he grew and developed egg, nest, home, country, universe. And it is certain that there was a sort of mysterious and pre-existing harmony between this creature and the structure. When, still a child, he dragged himself tortuously and jerkingly along beneath its gloomy arches, he seemed, with his human face and animal-like limbs, to be some reptile native to that damp, dark pavement upon which the Roman capitals cast so many grotesque shadows. Later on, the first time that he mechanically grasped the bell rope in the tower and clung to it and set the bell ringing, he seemed to Claude, his adopted father, like a child whose tongue is loosed and who begins to talk. It was thus, little by little, growing ever after the pattern of the cathedral, living there, sleeping there, seldom leaving its precincts, forever subject to its mysterious influence. He came to look like it, to be embedded in it, to form, as it were, an integral part of it. His sharp angles, if we may be pardoned the simile, fitted into the re-entering angles of the building, and he seemed not only to inhabit it, but to be its natural tenant. He might also be said to have assumed its form as the snail assumes the form of its shell. It was his dwelling, his hole, his wrapper. There was so deep an instinct of sympathy between him and the old church, There were so many magnetic affinities between them that he, in some sort, clung to it as the tortoise to its shell. The rugged cathedral was his shell. It is useless to warn the reader not to take literally the figures of speech which we are forced to use here to express this singular, symmetrical, direct, almost consubstantial union of a man and an edifice. It is also useless to speak of the degree of familiarity with the whole cathedral which he had acquired during so long and intimate a cohabitation. This dwelling was his own. It contained no depth which Quasimodo had not penetrated, no heights which he had not scaled. He often climbed the facade several stories high by the mere aid of projecting bits of sculpture. The towers upon the outer face of which he was frequently seen crawling like a lizard gliding over a perpendicular wall, those twin giants so lofty, so threatening, so terrible, had no vertigos, no terrors, no giddiness for him. They were so docile to his hand, so easily climbed, that he might be said to have tamed them. By dint of jumping, clambering, sporting amid the abysses of the huge cathedral, he had become, as it were, a monkey and a goat, like the Calabrian child who swims before he walks, and plays with the sea while but an infant. Moreover, not only his body, but also his spirit seemed to be molded by the cathedral. It's empty. But what was the state of that soul? What bent had it assumed? What form had it taken under its naughty covering in this wild life? It would be hard to tell. Quasimodo was born blind of one eye, hunchbacked, lame. It was only by great patience and great painstaking that Claude Frollo had succeeded in teaching him to speak. But a fatality followed the poor foundling. Bell ringer of Notre-Dame at the age of 14, a new infirmity soon put the finishing touch to his misfortunes. The bells had broken the drum of his ears. He became deaf. The only avenue which nature had left him open to the world was suddenly closed forever. In closing, it shut off the only ray of joy and light which still reached Quasimodo's soul. That soul relapsed into utter darkness. The miserable lad's melancholy became as complete and as hopeless as his deformity. Add to this that his deafness made him in some sort dumb, for that he might not be an object of laughter to others. From the moment that he realized his deafness, he firmly resolved to observe a silence which he scarcely ever broke, save when alone. So it's saying that even, like, he went deaf later, way later, after he learned how to speak. But after going deaf, like, it made speaking hard again, which already, was difficult to begin with. And it became apparent to him that people were laughing at him. So he stopped speaking. Of his own free will, he bound that tongue which Claude Frollo had worked so hard to set free. Hence it resulted that when necessity constrained him to speak, his tongue was stiff and awkward, like a door whose hinges have rusted. If now we strive to penetrate to Quasimodo's soul through this hard, thick bark, could we sound the depths of that misshapen organism? Could we hold a torch behind those non-transparent organs, explore the dark interior of that opaque being, illuminate its obscure corners, its absurd blind alleys, and cast a strong light suddenly upon the psyche imprisoned at the bottom of this well, we should doubtless find the poor thing in some constrained attitude, stunted and rickety, like those prisoners under the leads of Venice, who grew old, bent double in a stone coffer, too short and too low for them either to lie down or to stand up. The spirit certainly wastes away in a misshapen body. Quasimodo barely felt within him the blind stirring of a soul made in his own image. His impressions of objects underwent a considerable refraction before they reached his mind. His brain was a peculiar medium. The ideas which traversed it came forth greatly distorted. The reflection resulting from that refraction was necessarily divergent and deviated from the right path. Hence, endless optical illusions, endless aberrations of opinion, endless digressions into which his thought, sometimes foolish and sometimes idiotic, would wander. The first effect of this unfortunate condition of things was to disturb his views of all outward objects. He had scarcely any direct perception of them. The external world seemed much farther away from him than it does from us. The second effect of his misfortune was to make him mischievous. He was mischievous because he was untrained, savage. He was savage because he was ugly. There was a logic in his nature, as in ours. His strength, wonderfully developed as it was the cause of still greater mischief. Says Hobbes, a sturdy boy is a naughty boy. But we must do him the justice to say that this mischievous spirit was not innate. From his first intercourse with men, he had felt, had seen himself despised, scorned, repulsed. To him, human speech meant nothing but mockery or curses. As he grew up, he encountered nothing but hate. He caught the infection. He acquired the universal malevolence. He adopted the weapon with which he had been wounded. After all, he never turned his face to the world of men save with regret. His cathedral was enough for him. It was peopled with marble figures, kings, saints, and bishops who at least did not laugh at him and never looked upon him otherwise than with peace and goodwill. The other statues, those of monsters and demons, did not hate Quasimodo. He looked too much like them for that. They blessed him. They mocked other men. The saints were his friends. The monsters were his friends. They protected him. Thus, he had long conversations with them. He would sometimes pass whole hours squatting before one of these statues in solitary chat with it. If anyone came by, he would fly like a lover surprised in his serenade. And the cathedral was not only company for him, it was the universe. Nay, more, it was nature itself. He never dreamed that there were other hedgerows than the stained glass windows in perpetual bloom, other shade than that of the stone foliage always budding, loaded with birds in the thickets of Saxon capitals, other mountains than the colossal towers of the church, or other ocean than Paris roaring at their feet. But that which he loved more than all else in the motherly building, that which awakened his soul and bade it spread its poor stunted wings folded in such misery where it dwelt in darkness, that which sometimes actually made him happy, was the bells. He loved them, he caressed them, he talked to them, he understood them. From the chime in the steeple over the transept to the big bell above the door, he had a tender feeling for them all. The belfry of the transept and the two towers were to him like three great cages in which the birds trained by him sang for him alone. And yet it was these very bells which made him deaf. But mothers often love that child best which has cost them most pain. And I'm going to stop here so we don't have another abrupt ending, because it looks like, I only have a few minutes left. Wow, it's almost an hour. I'm going to keep going because we haven't even gotten to the mother. But yeah, so we've met Quasimodo. We have an understanding of Hugo's love for architecture. and how he came to write this book, seeing that carving of the Greek word for fate, and how Quasimodo and Frollo came to meet. And we're learning about Quasimodo's relationship with the cathedral. And so tomorrow we are going to continue on. We're going to meet Esmeralda. And we're going to dive into, I think at that point, we'll have gotten to a point where we can talk about the mother. And hopefully it'll blow you away as much as it did me, because it left me reeling. So, yeah, thanks for hanging out. I hope that everybody that comes here for comics aren't incredibly disappointed that I go back and forth and I'm doing books again. Don't worry, I'll be going back to comics again soon. But yeah, it's nice to come back, and I encourage you, like, get a copy, check it out, read along. It's wonderful. And with that, I will say adieu. Bye bye.